Now, I'm not going to get into biographies or introductions, other than maybe I'll just remind everybody of, we've heard from Alistair, we've heard from Joe and from Tommie, and then obviously Roger is Chief Executive Officer of AAMEG, the African Australian Mining and Energy Group, who are great supporters of both this conference and Africa Down Under, and our roommates in West Perth as well. So we're a united team in many ways. So thank you, Roger, and thank you for joining us on this panel. Now, we've got a clock the same 34 minutes, but we're running a little bit behind. So we're going to try and keep this to 20 minutes, because in all my years hosting session 4 panel discussions, I've known not to keep a minor between him and his or her and a beer. So we're going to try and get through this rapid answers as quickly as possible, and we might do a rapid quick Q&A the way we're going. So we've had lots of discussions today, and I think this panel discussion is going to cover many of the topics that we've covered in the first 3 sessions today, on downstream processing, on ESG, on financing, but many of those we've looked at in the Australian context, but let's look at them now in the African context. Sorry, I should introduce myself as Dominic Piper, editor of Australia's Paydirt and Gold Mining Journal. We're talking rare earths here specifically because of the circumstances that we have. But in a more general sense of critical minerals, in that for the diversity of global supply, Alistair, I'm going to start with you. Where does Africa sit within that global landscape? Is the world looking to Africa in the way that we think the world is looking to Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you look at just Southern America, there are massive resources of ionic clay and rare earth resources there. The story out of Africa is emerging. Between my own project, the ones in Madagascar, the Ugandan ones, Tanzania, and I think it's probably just the start of other rare earth discoveries that will come out of Africa. It's got the right environment for both ionic clays as well as hard rock materials. So it's very early stages in Africa, I believe, and I think the story will evolve very quickly and quite dramatically.
Thanks, Alistair. Tommie, I was in Cape Town for the Mining Indaba recently, where there was a huge US presence from Washington, and obviously we have a US presence at this conference as well. Is the US, it's been lacking in investment on the African continent, full stop, in the last 2 decades, 3 decades. In Uganda and elsewhere, are we seeing US influence, US investors or US government investment coming into the continent?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a step change in the US interest and involvement in Africa right across the board, and it's obviously to counter mostly geopolitical tensions with China, but specifically talking about commodities in general, but also rare earths, critical metals, battery metals. There's been a sea change in their willingness to engage. I would just say that the timing is really important for all of us, because we have to look at the full total supply chain. We can't just look at investment in a mine or a primary supply. We have to look at the whole investment, because, you know, if you mine it, then where does it go? You know, it has to go to a metal manufacturer or an alloy manufacturer or a magnet manufacturer, all down the chain until you get a final product. So what I think is still missing, though, is the true understanding of that this is an orchestra and it needs a conductor. And I've not seen that conductor step up in the Western world to conduct it similarly as to China. China does that. The Western world doesn't. So even if the US engages more, my question would rather be, how are they engaging?
Thanks, Tommie. Joe, on to you as well. I mean, you mentioned looking at a London listing. and London has always traditionally been the home of African mining finance, if you like. But the question of critical minerals and rare earths in particular is a very different question. Do you envisage Harena chasing US investment, European investment, Saudi investment, UAE investment, Indian investment in these scenarios?
Given that we're pre-IPO at the moment, I'll chase any investment. Look, needless to say, the engagement that we've got from potential offtake / downstream operators has been across all jurisdictions. There's, I guess, the US, Germany, France, the UK are all investing or potentially going to invest in downstream processing infrastructure in country. So, Linus with their separation plant in I think it's Texas, wherever they're putting that one, that's a real tangible investment. And all of these areas, or all of these downstream processing plants are going to need to find supply of a diverse range of materials, because it's not the one-size-fits-all environment. They're going to need to find the orchestra of product and elements to actually outturn a product that a downstream magnet manufacturer is going to want to buy. A 10-to-1 ratio of NdPr to DyTb, for instance, is what they're looking for when they're manufacturing a magnet. So the downstream processors are going to need a variety of supply, and they're going to have to find them and lock them in as quickly as possible for a long-term flow sheet to be able to actually continue to supply those people. But needless to say, the jurisdictions themselves, anybody that's got exposure to a defensive industries, GDP with defensive industries, it's no surprise that they're the people that are investing in the downstream processing technology.
Thanks, Joe. Roger, can I turn to you now? You were in Cape Town recently, and you had many discussions there, many meetings there. What was your takeaway from those meetings and your subsequent investigations? Are we in a new era of a scramble for Africa in the critical mineral sense?
I think the focus and the cadence have always been there, Dom. However, I think now, with the critical minerals becoming such a topic, and as I say, with Australia in the last 18 months developing its strategy, just as to illustrate, the cadence and the activity that were always there now getting a spotlight shone on it. And yes, I would hesitate to say scramble. I think Australians out there are doing what they've always done. Just get on with the job. Tend not to shout, look at me. They just do the job and get onto it. However, the periphery has all changed. There's now plenty of funding out there. There's now international guidelines, and indeed hunger at a government level to identify these assets and say to themselves, what these assets do for us back home. And it's called out in the critical minerals strategy, jobs, expertise, and becoming a critical minerals powerhouse. Thanks,
Roger. Yeah, I think, and I'm just going to turn to Alistair on that, a very similar point, well, a related point, but I just need to ask one housekeeping issue. Can my colleagues in the media room please come in and take some photographs of this beautiful looking panel here, please? So if Michael or Rhonda are in the media room listening, could you please bring the camera in and take a couple of photographs? Thanks, Roger. Alistair, I want to turn to you on a topic we were talking about just this morning. We've been able to talk about Australia's policies around critical minerals and downstream processing and value addition and their critical mineral strategy. And then we talk in this panel about Africa as one homogenous jurisdiction, but it's obviously not one homogenous jurisdiction. It's 53 different sovereign states. How can we make a definition between the critical minerals policies and the approach to critical minerals across the continent? Are you having the same conversations? I know in Guinea you have a bauxite operation, but are you seeing the same conversations in Guinea that you're seeing in Malawi and you're hearing in South Africa or elsewhere? Are there different conversations and different approaches going on around the continent?
Vastly different conversations and vastly different contexts. And if you look at the Australian government's program, it is basically limited in its scope to whatever sits on Australian sovereign soils. So the ability for an Australian company that has a foreign asset to access the same time the grants and systems is non-existent. And you understand why, because it's looking after its own backyard. You have to then step out into or ask for help by the Australian government for connections into other agencies and other businesses and systems where you have sovereign entities that are willing to actually step out of their sovereign boundaries into Africa or Southern America and assist in financing projects that have ultimately some benefit, whether it be the diversity of supply, that's one aspect, but really there has to be some benefit that goes back into that entity. So if the US is going to invest into Africa in a particular state, it'll want to know that there is some context of relationship, whether it be construction or offtakes or some a partnership of something that brings something of a benefit back to the US. So you see that, particularly the US stepping outside the boundary of its own sovereign to actually assist in it. I'm sort of just in the rare earth space. There's nothing that will happen in the bauxite space because that's very much a commercial enterprise and not necessarily a critical mineral, or not a critical mineral. Rare earths are a bit different. But the rare earths had then complexities where, for example, copper is quite a lot easier because you can just go through the standard process and technology to get a product that you can turn into a final material, consumer product. Rare earths have to go through various steps of complexity, and getting the funds and the capability around that is quite challenging. And then dealing with the nature of the diversity of the products plus the specification and the combinations is a lot of technology. But I think you come back to one perspective here is people say, well, there's no technology that exists out China. It does exist, but it exists in cottage industries. And it's there in Japan, it's there in Korea, it's there in the US, it's there in the UK. The technology is there to turn into magnets. The problem is each one of those businesses has a business plan of 1 year. And that 1 year business plan is based on the quota systems that comes out of China. They don't have a 2-year plan. They can't invest money because they don't have the supply. So you have to step back, all the way back to the resource and say, okay, now we've got the supply base done. What is the system of diversifying supply such that you enable those industries outside China to prosper? So that is a 3 to 5 year business plan. And that's where we're sort of positioning Kangan Kundi, is that let's just step into it, prove that these things got capability, allow the forums then to take place as to how this builds, because it's outside our mandate of our business model and certainly outside our capability of funding at this point in time or our technical expertise to step into that. So we need that assistance, or the industry needs that assistance.
Alistair, it strikes me, Tommie, that Ionic faces the same problems, but you've come from a slightly different angle in that you're using that potential demand out of the UK and then therefore Europe to sort of find your way into that market in a reverse engineered way. Is that a fair assessment of Ionic's position?
Yes, it is, because if you started producing, millions of tons of rare earths from Makutu tomorrow, who's going to buy it? You absolutely have to be in harmony with the rest of the supply. And, I'm reiterating the point, but that really is the issue. Makutu is development ready today, but where do you sell it to? It's a timing thing and it's a coordination thing. And to Alistair's point, there has to be coordination from all the different, let's call them Western governments, for lack of a better group name, to orchestrate this in a way that it makes sense. Because, you can't do this in a 1 year business plan. You need a 3, 5, 7 year horizon in your business plan to be able to orchestrate all of this so that it fits together. So what Ionic Rare Earths is doing is we're approaching the secondary market first, and through those relationships, we'll build a strategic partnership into offtakes for Makutu. That is one route, and one route that we are pursuing, yeah.
Thanks. Roger, we talked there about foreign government interest in Africa. US and the EU sit as the behemoths in this critical mineral space, and it's probably unfair to Australia to compare ourselves to the US and EU and China for that matter in supporting critical minerals development in Africa. But what about more peer comparison countries? What is Australia doing compared to the likes of the UK or Canada or the similar sized countries?
Yeah, thanks, Dom. And this is a known hobby horse of mine. We do not have the breadth and depth of support of pretty much any competitor. And specifically, if I was to zoom in on Canada, as I'm fond of doing, and look at the sheer volume of two-way economic treaties they have with the countries of Africa. They've got something like 40 of them. We have 2. So just zooming in on the Canadians, because they also, like us, have a sensational mineral endowment and are very, very good at digging holes in the ground and making big rocks into small rocks. So we're up against that. So they also have things like flow-through share schemes and all that we don't have. So what that means that you have to sort of focus on your strengths, and the strengths in the Australian sector is really that if I could use a car model, you're selling the Lexus product versus the Toyota product. You are selling the top shelf, high benchmark product, particularly when it comes to the respect that's shown for the host nation and how that respect trickles all the way down to the local communities and the engagement with them. We've heard some of those stories today, and it's something that I know in Australia we're very strong on, making sure that we treat people safely and equitably, and there's benefits all around. So that's what we go long on when we go overseas, to say, if you are going to let an Australian company have this piece of ground and develop the project, we will do so to the highest level of ESG standards available. We'll be open and honest with you. There'll be no corruption, etc., etc. That's all we've got. So therefore, it is incumbent on us in working behind the scenes to try and bring other attributes to the table, to work close with government, to help the government, help us, help them, help third-party destinations.
Joe, how does that play out in financial discussions, investment discussions, and indeed discussions with the government in Antananarivo? Are Australian companies seen as, not to put words in your mouth, Roger, but a preferred partner?
Yeah, good question, Dom. I think the reality of Madagascar, I'll stay on Madagascar, is that there's actually quite a rich mining history there across multiple companies. Rio Tinto's got Q&I there, ilmenite. Sumitomo's got a nickel mine there. There's potentially the Australian guys are coming in around graphite, mineral sands, even iron ore. So to say that we would be seen as a preferred partner, I think that might be a bit of a long bow to draw. But what I guess the Madagascar nation is looking for, and it's being helped by the World Bank, it's being helped by is to put in place structures that will bring in foreign investment and actually develop those industries, and especially the extractive industries, so that royalties and taxes flow back to the government and back to the people. The new mining code there is really well structured in that it's looking at putting effectively an environmental bond in place, but it's actually a social bond. That social bond is a percentage of your capital cost effectively, and then that must go back into the local communities. So it's not taken to the government or the environmental department. It actually goes back to their local communities to support the mines and support the people that actually need to be educated and upskilled to become part of that circular economy effectively at the end of the day. So to say that Australia would be preferred, I think they like having Australian people there because we generally get on and get things done. But yeah, preferred. I think they prefer people that bring money and invest into the community, regardless of the jurisdiction they're actually arriving from.
Alistair, did you, obviously Malawi has got quite a nascent mining industry. What has happened there on a commercial scale has been Australian run, and there's a number of Australian juniors operating there now. Are we seen as maybe we'll put aside the phrase preferred partner, but seen as a group of investors that can help develop the country on along lines that are aligned with both government and community?
Yeah, so Paladin originally had the Kalakira mine and operated it in the north of Malawi, uranium mine. It's now operated by Lotus, which I think there's plans around recommissioning that. And there wasn't too much around Malawi at all until Sovereign found quite a fantastic rutile deposit. Then we found quite a significant rare earth deposit, and sort of bringing Malawi back on the map of, hey, there's actually a lot more mineralisation there that's probably potential than people realised. And it's the Australians that are in there doing it. They're where there's like a Canadian company, but most of it is Australian. So we have that tenacity and that ability and that exploratory perspective on things to go and find and explore. So there is an appreciation, almost a sort of a wonder, why the hell is there so many Aussies in this country? But we are that kind of nature where we go in and find and discover and explore and develop. So there is a strong relationship. And there's another connection too, which was Malawi's very proudly part of the Commonwealth, part of the British law system. So we are seen as being part of the Commonwealth and therefore quite a good collaborator. But the relationship between the government of Malawi and Australia is almost distant. It's non-existent, apart from the embassy is in Harare and looks after various countries. But Malawi is sort of beset by the fact that it's an extraordinarily poor country. It's mostly just sustaining agriculture that gets it by. So it's got a long way to go in its development phase for prosperity. So what is the role of Australian government or Australian companies? Well, Australian companies are the ones that will actually make it. Get in there and start exploring, developing, and further development will come. Once Malawi gets to the point where people say, hey, it's more than just uranium, rutile and rare earths, there's more there, more systems will come. Roger's right, there is no tax treaty nor double taxation treaty between Australia and Malawi. So if you want to do your commercial structure, you have to go through London, back into Australia, to get the right kind of commercial optimisation. So there's a lot of work to do between Australia and Africa, and Roger's right, Canada are way in front.
Thanks, Alistair. Maybe, Tommie, you can add to that. Obviously, Uganda's even further behind Madagascar and Malawi as a resources destination. How are you finding operating there as an Australian company? Are you seen there as a positive, an investor of positive energy, if you like?
Yep, definitely, because it's not just in Uganda. In previous lives, I've been around the Great Lakes region, as far and wide as Ghana and even Zambia. And the one common theme that I have found, and is replicated again in Uganda, is the governments generally and the people on the ground, your typical employees, your typical stakeholders, they appreciate companies coming in from any nationality that treats them with respect and makes their lives better. And as it is, there are some nationalities, generalized, of course, that have created the perception of not doing that. While on the Australian side specifically, there is a general perception that we do care about our people. We do care about their livelihoods. We do care about bettering their circumstances, their life quality. And that is definitely appreciated. And it shines through in all the relationships and all the operations, when you run into issues, how it's resolved, etc. So the attitude definitely is positive, but it's because of the perception of we will be treated respectfully and our lives will be better.
Great, thanks, Tommie. Unfortunately, we've run out of time and I can hear the wine glasses chinking outside, so I think we need to call it a day there. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and could you just please join me in thanking our panellists for a great effort, particularly Tommie, who we bullied into coming in at the last moment.